In episode 6, Joe and Love, 40, Candace, pretty much all of her friends attend Henny's funeral. But the only thing that Joe can focus on is how the hell Candace is still here. Which I guess is better than focusing on the fact that you're at a funeral for a guy you murdered. After the funeral, 40's feeling pretty emotional and tells Candace that he wants her to move out of that Airbnb and move into his place. But Love thinks it's way too early for that. But 40 just inadvertently told Joe that Candace is staying in a B&B, and now all Joe has to do is track it down and find her and get rid of her. At the funeral, Joe also sees Candace and the cop who stopped him for jaywalking, and because he's at the funeral of a guy he killed, he's very, very paranoid. But that certainly is not stopping his obsession with Candace, and when she leaves Anavra, Will follows her. But when he sees an unmarked police officer, he stops, and he ends up losing her tail. Joe turns around and heads back to his apartment where he sees Ellie, and she's doing a lot better, but Delilah is not. She's obsessed with taking down Henderson, because now that he's a murder victim, he's become a martyr. Joe also realizes that while Ellie is putting on a facade, she's also having a tough time with this and needs someone in her life. So when she invites him to watch a movie, even though he's not a big movie guy, he agrees and puts the Candace thing on the back burner. The next day at work, 40 comes up to Joe and lets him know that they're going to set up shop in a production company in the back of a Anavran, and he's going to make Joe an executive producer along with Candace. He hands Joe a form to fill out to name his production company. It can be anything he wants, but on the production company form, he also sees Candace's name, but she hasn't put an address. So Joe asks, hey, I'll put my address here, but what's hers? But 40 doesn't actually know. He just knows the area that she lives in. That's all that Joe needs, though. He hops on Airbnb and figures out what house she probably would be renting from. Now, he's supposed to take a drive with Love to go get donuts, but he figures he can squeeze in time to go to this house, and he's standing outside of it waiting for Candace to come out, but he sees that same plainclothes officer show up, and he gets spooked and runs away. But he also didn't manage his time wisely because it made him an hour late to meet Love. And when he gets back to Anavran, he sees Love talking to that same plainclothes cop, and now he's convinced that he's going to be caught. So when he walks in there, he's very skittish. But Love isn't giving off the vibe of somebody who just found out that her boyfriend is a serial killer. Now, don't get me wrong, she's pissed, but Joe has to find out what was up with that guy and says, hey, when I walked in, you were talking to some guy. Who was that? Yeah, that's our family's private investigator. I hired him to tail Candace because I just don't trust her. Now, while Joe is relieved that he wasn't being followed, he thinks it's crazy that she's being so normal about this. I mean, she just hired a private investigator to follow her boyfriend's girlfriend. And now Joe's starting to think, could you have me followed? The beginning of a fight breaks out, but cooler heads prevail, and Love says, you know what, you're right, it is a little much. I'll call off the investigation tomorrow. But Joe and Love weren't the only ones keeping tabs, because Candace did the exact same thing Joe did. Candace took Joe's address, wrote it down, and went to his place and starts looking through the windows, but she's caught by Delilah. She explains that she's Joe's ex-girlfriend and she's just looking for a pair of earrings, and Delilah says, hey, don't I know you? I saw you at Henderson's funeral. Did you actually know him? And when Candace says no, he wasn't really my type, it seems like his comedy was kind of creepy, Delilah suddenly is on board with helping her and goes into the apartment to see if she can find the earrings. She doesn't let Candace in, but while she's searching for those earrings, Candace sneaks in real quick, unlocks one of the windows, and sneaks out. Of course, Delilah doesn't find any earrings, but that's all that Candace needed. But unfortunately for Candace, the investigator saw all of this go down and calls Love up and says, hey, I think there's something you need to see. When Joe returns to the apartment that night, he's relieved that Love has called off the dogs, but he's greeted by Ellie, who is just impressed that he had not only Love Quinn, but this other redheaded girl that showed up today. And right away, Joe knows, oh my god, Candace was here. She's crossed the line. So Joe is done playing games at this point. He grabs some duct tape and rope and heads on over to Candace's Airbnb and breaks in, but when he does so, he's knocked out and tied up. And while he thinks it's Candace, it's not. It's actually the homeowner. She's supposed to be away in Germany according to the Airbnb site, but she's not. She's simply renting a room to Candace. And Joe talks his way out of it by saying it was like a rape fantasy situation, but while that was going on, Candace was going back to Joe's to sneak in. And when she opens up the window, she finds Love Quinn sitting there waiting for her. And immediately Candace says this isn't what it looks like, but Love has a folder with her true identity in it. And that's when Candace comes clean. The guy you're dating, the guy you know as Will, isn't named Will. His name is Joe, and he's my former boyfriend who attacked me. And I'm pretty sure he did it to another girl, and I came here to protect you and your family. But most importantly, I came here to protect you. And then she gives Love proof. So when Joe returns home, Candace is long gone, but Love is sitting there baking up some cinnamon buns. But when Joe goes to eat one, it tastes terrible because Love switched around the ingredients. And she says, yeah, no, it sucks to be lied to, doesn't it? Do you want to explain this? And she throws him an envelope that has a picture of Joe and Candace when they were dating. Love screams that Candace is claiming that you killed somebody and you killed another girl and you tried to kill her. And immediately he thinks fast and comes up with a story that Candace is crazy and he moved to Los Angeles and changed his name just to simply get away from her. He never tried to kill her. If so, the cops would have gotten him. And as for the other girl, he went on one date with Guinevere Beck and he thinks that she posted something on Instagram just to make her actual boyfriend jealous. But all of these fantasies are just made up in Candace's head. And that's one of the reasons he never had social media, because he never wanted her to find him. It's seems like Love is actually buying this story, and Joe says, I've never loved anyone the way that I love you. And Love says, yeah, me too, which makes this even harder. We're done. And she breaks things off with Joe. And one of the reasons she broke things off with Joe is because the truth is such a big deal to Love Quinn. Her husband kept the fact that he was sick a secret for 2 months. But the reason he did so is to keep a little normalcy before life changed forever. The next day, Joe heads into the store and tries to give back his apron and quit, but 40 says, you don't have to quit. I talked to Love, and we just think you're punished enough at this point, but just stay away from her and stay out of her airspace. And Joe asks 40, why exactly are you doing this? And 40 says, well, while you did lie about your identity, and that's a pretty shitty thing to do, I do like having you around, and you're one of the more real people that I know. That night when Joe gets home, Ellie storms out of her apartment and says, would you please do something? And when Joe enters their apartment, Delilah is sitting there just combing over all this material trying to figure out this case. Joe is trying to talk her down a little bit, and the two end up having sex. And afterwards, Joe says, you know, you're trying to find the story, but the story is yours. So why don't you just write the story from your standpoint, and maybe it'll encourage other victims to come forward. And while that seems like a great idea, Delilah just looks at him and says, I don't need you mansplaining this. Thank you for watching this recap. If you do not see the next one up in the corner right there on the end screen, don't worry, it'll be up shortly. Please consider following the channel. That'd be cool. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, and if you don't, there's a thumbs down button for a reason.